and welcome to the podcast. Today we are sitting down, me, David, and Melissa, to begin the first of our 3 parts that we're continuing off of one of our previous conversations. Me and Melissa got on a episode a couple weeks ago, and we talked about influence when it came to middle school. And since we both have kids in middle school, we were talking about how it really seems like the influence of social media and other things has kind of shifted from a high school standard to now it seems like middle school has much more of an influence from social media than high school does. But we thought that it would be a great idea to go ahead and push towards wanting to continue the conversation on middle school. And so we're going to do 3 more episodes geared specifically towards middle school. And today's conversation is communication, because communication is a big part of ministry in general. But if you've been a youth pastor for a little while, communicating to middle schoolers is different than communicating to high schoolers, and there are different opportunities and different things that you have to come into just your mind when you come into these conversations and how to approach them best. And so with this, David, why don't we just go start with you, man? When it comes to middle school, what is the first thing that hits your mind?
You know, I don't know if it's just because God has called me to be a youth pastor, but I do not get the same cringy feeling that a lot of even youth pastors get when you think middle school. I absolutely love middle school age. And the thing that I love about it the most is that with middle school, they're all in. You know, they've come from, like, for those that have come from like a children's ministry kind of thing, they feel like they're given this level of freedom that they've never really experienced yet. And so, though there's, a fair amount of like patience and wrangling in and different things like that, and especially patience for our high school students, as they get very easily annoyed as well. But there's just this mentality of they are there even when the doors aren't open. Junior high students, if you let them, they'd show up to your office every day and just, and they have my experience has been they have such a hunger and a passion to learn and to be part of all the things. And then you get to high school and there's more and more pressure that's put on you, and you start working and you're in all the sports and you're all the things. And before long, they turn 16 years old, they get the license, and vominosh, you'll see them on senior Sunday. And so middle school, it's like, I feel like that is the place where I find myself the most intentional, because that is undivided attention we get with those students. And I think it's vital for the spiritual formation that will lead to their high school days and hopefully afterwards.
Yeah, definitely. And I would say that we all agree that even though middle school can be a little chaotic, middle school can be a little unplanned sometimes. I love that you use the fact of all in, because I don't think that high schoolers lose that all in. Like you said, though, I think it's one of those things that they're all in shifts, and it becomes a
Yeah,
multifaceted all in. And so middle school do not have near the obligations that high school does.
that's
And
it.
so with that, the high school's all in isn't just stretched in 2 or 3 different ways: family, school, and church. It's family, school, job, church, relationships, all the things. And so like you have
Mm.
tons of different things. But Melissa, why is this age group so important to focus on in ministry?
Well, I think David really nailed it right there with like, this is the time that we have them. I know my youth group, we're in a low income neighborhood. And so when my kids get to where they can work, they have to work to like literally support their family. Or if they want to do any kind of extracurricular or anything, they have to pay for that. And so I just lose them. Like it's not even 16, it's 15, because you can get a job at 15 in town. And so I lose them then. So yeah, I think David's right. You have to like capture those 3 or 4, how many years you've got of middle school, um, and like pour into them as much as they can, because that's what they're going to take with them when they get to high school or college, or like even, past that. And so it's like, we've just got to stuff them full of the Holy Spirit, stuff them full, so that they have those resources.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think So obviously it's one of those things that, and I think when you look at kind of what personally draws most youth pastors that have been in the game for a while, you've probably heard this expression of like, if you get them in middle school, you'll keep them in high school. And so finding that interest and finding that motivation for being there in middle school, giving them an opportunity to be a part of something, if that sticks, they'll stay through their high school years. If you don't find that connective point in middle school, it's going to be a lot harder to find that connective point in high school. Not impossible, but it does make it significantly different. And I think one of those things with that is, with middle school, like I said, me and Melissa are going through it right now. Melissa, this is your second, but this is my first. And so with middle school, some of those really, really big shifts happen developmentally. But then there's also just the, um, who am I? What am I doing? Where am I supposed to be? All of those different conversations, as far as like they're trying to figure out who they are. And that really, really kind of begins to take hold of their life in middle school. And then it still happens in high school, but there's a lot of high schoolers that are like, hey, I'm me, leave me alone. Um, and so you kind of see this huge developmental shift that starts to happen in middle school. And so, with that, there's a lot of different things that have to be tackled. Like I said, there's identity. We have to tell them who they are, if not, culture will. We have to tell them, what they're here for, what they're made to do. We have to show them that they're loved. We have to show them that they can find value and appreciation in ways that aren't cultural, and ways that are not performance based. We have to show them ways, that they are, basically, that they have value in the world that they are a part of, and it doesn't have to revolve around what or how they react or what they do. And so, how do you see those changes reflect, in their behavior at church? Because specifically, like those are big deals, and a lot of times I feel like school is a much wider box for them to fit in, and then church is like this narrow funnel that kind of like, okay, well, we can only do these specific things, we can only act in these certain ways, and they're getting more freedoms as they get older because youth ministry has a lot more freedom than children's ministry. But how do we see those changes start to reflect in their behavior at church?
I think one of the things you said really nails it is trying to show these students that they have value not based on their performance but based on the fact that God created them with a purpose and a plan. And when we look at Ephesians chapter 2, Galatians chapter 6, and just thinking through like the purpose and the plan and the calling that God has put on every student, I think or on every person. um, I think it changes the game a little bit because we're so used to hearing like, as long as you get good grades and you do well in sports and you get to a good college, then all the different things, and it's just almost like this like growing checklist as you get older and older of things that you have to do to be successful in life. And sometimes just simply hearing that you are enough because God created you to be enough, to hear and I don't necessarily, because I do think that the church has kind of, compared to where we were when we were kids to now, because just thinking about generationally, when we were kids, it was all about, we are scum, we are garbage, we are this, and we're not ever good enough. And so God is doing this. And then there was this cultural shift about, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago that started shifting more and more to, you're perfect and God loves you just how you are. And it went from, we got tired of being told that we're garbage and not good enough, to now it's shifted away from um, God being enough through us to, we're enough, and almost like we're God. And now we're sort of trying to correct the ship again. But helping these students understand that they're worthy because God created them to be, and that God has given them a specific purpose and a plan, and helping them to realize those things, not based on, again, what they can do, but what God is doing through them and how God has created them and wired them. And a lot of times that comes through um, the ways that they're able to serve inside the youth ministry, inside the church, whether that's through like music or media or helping out with the kids or whatever it might be, helping them discover those things, and they start to realize like, man, I do have value, and just because I showed up today and got to serve. And I think it does make it. And I know that sounds a little performative, but I think it's a little, it's slightly different, if that makes any sense at all.
Oh no, I was going to say the same thing about the serving part. That getting them involved in the body of the church and actively participating. It's not like when they were in children's ministry, because I did children's ministry first. That you were to sit there and everything was for them. Like I had to do the programming for them. But now when we get to middle school, part of it that I love is that they find out that they are capable of doing things, of serving even outside of the church, like at a food pantry or a breakfast on Bob Street, something like that, where you're making sandwiches. That they have the ability, that they have like the physical ability to do these things to help people in their community, but also in their church. And it makes them feel more part of the church, not just I'm coming because my mom made me get in the car today. And some of that is probably still happening, right? But if they have a specific thing that they know they're going to do, my high schooler, he was just helping in the elementary class, and now he's been put on screen duty. He gets to push the button to make the screens go. And like that difference in him, just where he has a job, he has a thing to do, he has a purpose to be there, where then he's getting the message. Because if he was sitting beside me, I mean, half the time I was going, put your phone away, put your phone away, put your phone away. So I love when they have a thing to do that gets them involved, because it helps them focus on the message as well as like being a part of it. I think that's a big thing for middle schoolers, right? Being a part of something. That's why we see them joining sports and theater and band, choir, because they want to be part of something. They want to be in a group. They want to be in a clique. And so I love that we give that in
Yeah.
a safe space of youth ministry.
Well, and we'll spend a lot more time talking about the equipping and leadership in our next episode, because that's the topic for next week. But I think that's a huge part of communication too, because they want to have that communication that they're valued enough to have a job.
Right.
But it's how we communicate those things that's really really important. But I think one of the main things to understand with like communicating with middle schoolers is understanding how they communicate. And so, just from your perspectives, and this could be a short answer, what are the main ways middle schoolers talk to each other today?
Text.
Text.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well,
Yeah. I will say it's gotten, and I think we talked about this a little bit on a previous episode, is that middle schoolers are getting very, very creative with the way that they're communicating, and they're using the resources they have at school, whether that's like a Google, like a shared Google Doc that's supposed to be for a project or whatever. So I do think it's important for us to understand like they are finding very creative ways, and as good as like as helpful as that can be for them to communicate, it's also can be just as dangerous, as we know.
yeah, no, and I think that's a huge thing. And one of the other things, I mean, I have a sixth grade boy, and so one of the major forms of communication for him, and it almost even blends into his perception of friendship now, is gaming. Um, he can play with a person that he's never met before, and immediately they're friends. And it's like, I don't think you understand what friends are. And so we have to look into that perception, even generationally, of
Mhm.
how we see friendships and how we communicate to friends and how they see friendships and how they communicate with friends. And so how talking with that, what role does like TikTok or gaming platforms, how does that play into their friendships? Because I know with my child especially, it's one of those things, we have this conversation all the time of like our role with Xbox is like he cannot add anybody that as a friend that he has not met in person, that we do not know their parents and stuff like that. And so we have this back and forth all the time of this mindset of like, well, they're like, I know them from school, like they walked by me in the hall, but they are really good at Rocket League and they said they'd play with me, or something like that. And it's like, that's not a friend.
Yeah.
Like, you have to understand. And so, with that, what role does TikTok and gaming and other social media, because I really think gaming is a social media
Mm-hmm.
now, what how does that play into communication with middle school? What does that do with friendships? And how do they handle it?
I think it's interesting that you said about the definition of a friend, because in cybersecurity we teach them, like for safety, that a friend is a person you know in life. You can physically touch them. That is a friend. A friend is not someone that you have online, but it's becoming so much more prominent now that, yeah, it's the people I play games with that live in different countries. And those are my friends. And when we give a definition of a friend, like it's a person I talk to about the things that are important to me and, that I do stuff with, that checks all those boxes. So it's hard to argue with their definition of a friend versus ours. So it's such a fine line there. But I think that's interesting because they've got so much more of the world readily available to them, especially in the gaming platforms, because they're all over the world. It's not just in their small little hometown. So I think it's an interesting concept when you like think of the ramifications of it.
Well, and I think another thing that like really solidifies and concretes friendships, and this is one of those things like some of y'all might listening be like, well, this isn't communication either, but I firmly think that friendship is a huge part of communication in middle school, and I would say that's a basis of most of their communication because they talk to their friends more than they talk to their parents. But I think one of the other things that solidifies and concretes those friendships, even back in our times as teenagers, um, and I'm not going to go into how long ago those were. But I think one of those things that kind of makes or breaks the friendship is overcoming obstacles together.
Right?
And so I think it's one of those things that has happened that now overcoming obstacles might be playing Call of Duty together and getting a victory. I almost said victory royale. I think that's Fortnite. Getting a win in the Call of Duty game, or winning in Fortnite, or like getting a certain rank in Rocket League or something like that. That is their new achievement that like solidifies and concretes friendships. And it's like, well, I mean, that's cool, but like, is that really an achievement that's like in the same light? How does that work on the girls' side of things, though, Melissa?
Oh no, they're playing games just as much. I was just thinking all those games you were saying were the ones that Colin plays, the boy. But the girl, she plays different games, Roblox, and there's an animal game they're playing right now. It's not the Nintendo one. It's a different one where they can get in groups and then they're all in charge of. It's almost like the old oh, we put them on our backpacks and you had to make sure they were fed and that they had. Thank you,
Tamagotchis.
Tamagotchi. It's like Tamagotchis, but
Now we're
online.
aging ourselves.
It really, yeah. So Tamagotchis, but online, and they're in a group, and so they all take care of it together. So I think that part's really cool because then they
I've
invite,
never heard of
yeah, they
this.
invite their friends to like help them raise
Brent
their
was like, I want to play.
right. So
Side note.
I mean, that is what I hear about really all that's happening in my living room in the morning because there's a bunch of middle school girls there. And so they're playing those same games with the same platforms as far as like texting back and forth in that range. They're also they're big. Roblox and Minecraft are still big, so
Yeah.
it's it's
No.
just as much as the boys.
Sure. And so we looked at the positive side of friendship and stuff like that, but what role or how does conflict typically look like in their world? Because if we look at the good side of communication, we have to look at the bad side. And so what does conflict typically look like in the world of middle schoolers, and how do they handle it, if handle it at all?
Ooh,
That's an interesting one. I think you have two, at least from my experience, you have kind of two main schools of thought. They either are right in the middle of it and they're sort of perpetuating to make the conflict worse.
mm-hmm.
So it's that sort of that gossip, and it becomes this humongous thing. Is like let's call it what it is. The sheer amount of school shooting threats that have risen, most of them are at middle schools. And I think the reason for that is they hear one person has a gun, thought about bringing a gun, made a joke about it, whatever it might be. And of course, you have to take all of those things seriously. But it gets to a point where one person says something and then telephone down the rabbit hole. Next thing you know, parents are calling the school going, I was told that there's a bomb and there's all these things. And it's like, so by the time the communication gets to the top where they can like really investigate it, it takes quite a while to figure out how all of this started. Is it credible? Is it not? Is it gossip? Is it not? And it's a tough thing. And then the other side of it, I would say, is like with something a little less serious, is like with a fight or whatever. Someone's mad at another person and they fight in the bathroom, or they're vaping, or whatever it might be.
Hmm.
Which I say less serious. Vaping's very serious. That just popped in my head as I was talking. But it seems like there's so many different things, and for some they think it's funny, so they don't understand. Like, they maybe don't have the maturity to understand that this is not a funny thing. This is not a game. Like, this is real life and real people. And then I think a lot of others that are maybe a little bit more, we'll call them kind of the homeschool effect of, sort of being sheltered or whatever. It terrifies them, and so you get that too. I mean, I've certainly had a lot of students call me and go, I am scared to go to school because this is happening,
Hmm.
and or they hear something, and so I think there's definitely a lot of that these students are navigating. And we talked a little bit about going from children's ministry to middle school. It is a sharp cultural shock to some of these students who went from crafts and unicorns and and all of the fun, very focused on you, to, oh, the world is scary at times, and it's dark at times, and maybe it's not quite as um, you know fun as maybe I thought it was. Or they start to get exposed to some really, and obviously that's not all. There's a lot of kids, especially the ones like you had talked about, low income, that get an education in that way too early in life.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. No, definitely. And I think that's one of those things. And I mean, we look at it as it's a new thing, but honestly, most of the time when it comes to conflict, we can go back to the fight or flight response. Um, there's going to be middle schoolers that engage fully in that conflict, and it might be a healthy engagement of they want to go address the issue and handle the issue, or it might be a very, very toxic way of handling that issue where they go and they spread rumors, or they make empty threats, or they make real threats. Um, and there's this just attack that goes on, or there's and my son has done both of these in the past year. There's either this like immediate jump into like, well, this is happening and I'm gonna add to it, but then there's also this like, I'm gonna back out of this completely, I'm gonna run away, I'm never gonna tell anybody about anything, and like I'm just gonna try and box this in and leave it alone kind of thing.
Hmm.
And neither of them are necessarily okay, especially on the toxic side of conflict fight. But it's how we handle things. And I think as we learn in high school and college and adulthood, we learn how to navigate these roads better. They are literally throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks.
Right.
And so I think there's a lot of randomness and a lot of sporadic nature when it comes to how they handle conflict, because they are literally just trying to figure out what works best, what works at all, and they're trying not to look stupid in the process. Because once again, it goes back to identity, what people think of them, how they're perceived by their peers, all that stuff. So, we just for the sake of time, because we are trying to keep these a little more concise, moving into season 5, let's move to communicating to middle schoolers in our ministries. Just a couple quick things. What have you found that works well when you're trying to engage with middle schoolers in a group? This can be a like just your best tip, best trick, whatever, and then we're gonna move on.
I'd say for me, I've always had kind of a hard open line with our students to just be honest about where they are, whether that's going deep and serious or engaging in the silly. I think I would say my number one rule, and I drive home with all of our leaders, is that if they trust you in the small fun things, they'll trust you when things get serious. And so if if we make a major push to try to always go deep, we're never gonna, I can't say never. It's gonna be a little bit harder, because I think sometimes students feel like, well, I don't necessarily have anything crazy deep in my life right now. And so, does that mean that I'm not part of the group, or like I have nothing to contribute? And you don't ever want to discourage that. So if they want to talk about their love for cats, or or something that you might deem silly or completely off topic, go ahead and engage with it, because if you show them that support and that trust in that moment, when things do hit the fan, and they will, they're going to feel open to share, and they may not link it back mentally or emotionally, that they've always felt safe. But I think we create an environment, we can foster an environment where they feel safe in the little things, they'll feel safe in the big things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really like with their parents' permission, texting with our students, especially if you've got another adult in the group. But for example, I like noticing things that they think no one else has noticed in a good way. So our school district is really good about posting pictures. They've kind of upped this lately. And so there was a big event in one of our middle schools, and one of my kids was like plastered on the post about it. And so I screenshot it and I sent it to her, and she goes, "Oh my God, first of all, where did you get this?" And I was like, "You're on like the district like Facebook page. Big deal, big deal." And she had no idea, but her mom hadn't seen it, her grandma hadn't seen it. And so it was someone noticed her. And so I love those moments because it makes them feel special, but it also just makes them feel like someone's paying attention. And so if we can go to those things, go to their choir concert, go to their band concert, all those things, all the tennis tournament, and then that allows those conversations, that communication, to continue in a better way because they see that you care about them as a person, not only as a number on your attendance list for the admin board to see, right? They are yours.
Yeah. No, I definitely think that y'all both kind of hit the aspect of this is, and you have to find ways to individualize a group. Where you can go in and you can say, hey, like you did awesome at this. I saw that you competed in this thing, or like, hey, like I love cats too, or some whatever. I mean, like find those moments where you can have those. But I think it also comes down to boiling down to and some it depends on your ministry size and stuff like that. Knowing kids names is a big deal. Know their name, remember one thing that happened last week. Don't remember their whole life story, you can't do it. But if you remember the last thing that they told you and you check in on that last thing, they're going to be like, wow, I was heard. That was cool. Wow. And so that is going to keep it moving. And it's something that's really, really good. And so those are all big things when it comes to communication and individualizing these conversations. What is a big don't when it comes to trying to speak middle school language and trying to communicate with middle schoolers?
Don't use the slang unless you're like trying to use
Exactly
it.
what I was gonna say.
Yeah, unless you're trying to use it in like a funny way, but don't be like super serious. Like I know about all the riz and not like you know um just don't do it. It's so cringe. It's just awful, and it will make them go, "Oh, I don't, I don't know about you." Like
Mhm.
it's not
You're
who you are. It's not authentic and it's not genuine.
That's it.
Yeah. You've got some skibbity drip going on.
Yes, all the toilets. That would
All the
fall out of
But
toilets.
fashion.
uh no, with that, I think that's one of the big things is don't try to be someone that you're not.
Mm-hmm.
Um because they are looking, even though you might be different, you are someone that they look up to. You are a friend of theirs. And it doesn't matter if they've known you for 2 seconds or if they have known you for the entire middle school career. Middle school relationships start like matches. It is instantaneous, and they might think that you are the coolest thing since sliced bread, and you're like, man, I asked if they wanted a drink from the fridge. Like, I mean, they happen really, really fast, and so be sure to make the most of the opportunities that you have with that. And then the other half of that is with these things and the big don'ts. Also, like, don't try to dumb it down. um I think a lot of times we have this mindset where like high school can like reach up to these goals that we've set for them and middle school can't, but middle school can just as much.
if not
I
more.
think there's a time and a place for a lot of different things, and I am all for ministries that have an elevated status of different things that are achievable as you grow in your time in ministry, or in the youth ministry, like for whether that be leadership positions or whether that be your scope and sequence of what you're teaching your students. All these things, those are great things, but don't ever be afraid to ask a question that you might think goes over their heads. All else fails, you might have to re-explain it to them. But a lot of them are hungry, like David said earlier, and they just really, really want to be included in things. And so if you challenge them with hard things, that's a value thing. They're going to really, really think highly of you and what you said. And they're going to be like, wow, he really, like, he thought I could answer that. That's crazy. And so it's really, really important. But um then yeah, I think finding those moments to make them feel value, make them feel worth it, make them feel loved and appreciated is super, super important. And I will say, just a thing that I have learned the hard way from, also make sure that you are personable with everybody. I had a season in my current church where there were some middle schoolers that were scared of me because they thought that I was this stern, gruff youth pastor. And I literally had a conversation with my associate youth pastor, and she was like, look, like, there are kids that are scared of you because they think you're mean. They just don't know you. Like, you need to go and crack this before it gets too big. And so we ended up working towards a process to where for a couple months, or for a couple years, I went for 2 or 3 weeks and I taught the middle school. And I had only taught high school before then, but we made this transition to where I started making sure that those relationships were there, because last thing I wanted to do was middle schoolers walk into high school thinking that I was this mean, gruff, hateful person, even though that's not a thing at all. That was what they had seen. We still have to address it. So, um, let's just end with this. What is one takeaway from today's conversation that you hope sticks with the person listening?
I think I think it goes back to value. Um, so many. No, I'll go with this. The first time I ever heard the words "I'm proud of you" and "I love you" came from my youth pastor when I was 13. You never know what student might walk into your ministry who feels completely unlovable, who feels
Yeah,
abused. I try not to
yeah,
get too emotional, but I didn't know what love was until I joined a youth ministry. I
yeah,
didn't know that I could be worthy of that. I didn't know that people could like you um, for you until I joined a youth group. Um, I went through some pretty heavy abuses growing up, and if it wasn't for my youth pastor, I don't know where I'd be. You know,
yeah,
and so I always, you know, even the word "I love you" is still a very hard one for me to say. Somebody will come, like, you know how kids are. They'll throw that word out, and to me, that is not a word to be throwing out
sure,
willy nilly. For me, it's a big deal, and I'm very
yeah,
careful about it. But then I also have to remember, like, what if somebody nobody would have known that about me. I'm very private when it comes to stuff like that. And so, especially back then, I was very guarded. And you never know what student might come in and you have no idea what they've gone through. And what if you are the first person to tell them that, and for them to truly be seen? Or what if they're under the shadow of an older brother or an older sister who's like an absolute superstar in their school or their family or whatever, and they've never been told like that they matter or value. So whether it's a dark situation or even just simply they're falling through the cracks,
yeah,
I think it's or in somebody else's shadow. Like, I just think it's really important that we show value, because you never know what student might find their calling because somebody cared and listened. That was
yeah,
certainly my story.
yeah, definitely. Melissa, real quick.
Well, I lost mine because that was so good, and I'm trying not to cry. So remind me of the question.
Sorry.
Oh well, I mean that's okay too. We can just end with
Let's
what
do
David
that.
said.
Yes.
Mine was on that spectrum too. I am in the position that I'm in right now because my youth pastor acknowledged the fact that I said I was called to ministry in between my 7th and 8th grade year.
Yep.
That is the reason that I am in ministry, is because I said, "Hey, I think God's calling me to do this," and he said, "Awesome. Let's talk about it." And then he
And
continued to pursue that and continued to push me towards that. Even texted me out of the blue to find my first youth ministry job years down the road.
mhm.
And so never underestimate the value of a conversation, never underestimate the value of what you can do. But for that, like I said, we're trying to keep these more concise and a little more focused. And so thank you for this conversation. And thank you for being a listener all the way into season 5. It is so crazy that to me that we are at episode 202, which is absolutely mind blowing. It has been such a ride and such an awesome opportunity to even have David and Melissa come on and join us as hosts. And we just thank you for listening. If you haven't yet, please go to our website, studentministryconversations.org. You can find our episodes, show notes. You can find our merch. We have stuff in the shop that you're welcome to buy. And all of that just goes into trying to help make this podcast better. And we don't make anything off of this. We don't pay for advertisements. We don't do anything like that. And so if the best thing you can do for us is go and share this with your friends that are in youth ministry, we would love to grow our audience on this because we want to get more information out to youth pastors, whether they're new or old, and you can play a huge part in that. But until next time, we thank you for listening. We hope you have a great week. And if you ever need us, we are here. Feel free to reach out and we'd love to talk to you. Y'all have a great week.